Welcome to a look back at the year 1990 in the video game industry. The arcade scene was still booming, the home console wars were heating up, and the personal computer was slowly becoming a gaming powerhouse. It was the start of a new decade, defined by legal battles, nationwide competitions, and software releases that completely altered the landscape of gaming forever. In the United States, 1990 was the year Nintendo took their dominance on the road with the massive Nintendo World Championships. Touring across 29 cities, this event turned living room gamers into local celebrities. The Nintendo World Championships wasn't just a gaming tournament, it was a massive touring rock concert for video game nerds. Conceived by Steve Grossman and Jay Coleman from EMCI, Nintendo's marketing agency, the event was heavily inspired by the 1989 movie The Wizard. It rolled through 29 American cities, setting up dozens of gaming stations, called pods, in massive arenas, all hosted by high-energy stage moderators Terry Lee Turok and John Michael Fain. Players were divided into 3 age brackets, 11 and under, 12 to 17, and 18 and over. The goal was to secure a top score on a specially manufactured timed competition cartridge. Competitors had exactly 6 minutes and 21 seconds to play a gauntlet of 3 games. First, you had to collect 50 coins in Super Mario Bros. The moment you grabbed the 50th coin, the game instantly swapped to Rad Racer, where you had to complete a customized first track. After crossing the finish line, whatever time you had left was spent playing Tetris to rack up as many points as humanly possible before the clock hit 0. But here is the ultimate hot take. Regarding the 1990 Nintendo World Championships, it was not actually a test of your overall gaming skills. It was entirely a Tetris tournament in disguise, because the scoring formula was fundamentally broken. At the end of the time limit, your Super Mario Bros. Score was multiplied by 1, your Rad Racer score was multiplied by 10, but your Tetris score was multiplied by 25. Because of this massive multiplier, Mario and Rad Racer were mathematically irrelevant. They were just speed bumps. Your only objective was to get through them as fast as physically possible to maximize your time in Tetris. Because of this, the most elite players developed completely counterintuitive strategies. In Super Mario Bros., instead of playing perfectly, the absolute fastest way to get 50 coins and end the segment was to collect a specific cluster of coins and then intentionally kill your character twice. Dying actually saved precious seconds of screen scrolling and animation, getting you to Tetris much faster. Another major misconception surrounds the legendary gold cartridges. Because 90 gray competition cartridges were given out to the tournament finalists, people often assumed the ultra-rare 26 gold variants were given to the ultimate grand champions. They weren't. The old variants never actually were at the live events. They were given away in a completely separate mail-in sweepstakes run by Nintendo Power. The actual live tournament culminated in a massive World Finals held at the Star Trek Theater at Universal Studios, Hollywood. The grand prize for the champions was incredibly purely 1990, a $10,000 United States savings bond, a brand new 1990 Geo Metro convertible, a 40-inch rear projection television, and a gold-painted Mario trophy. When the dust settled at Universal Studios, 3 official champions were crowned. Jeff Hansen won the 11 and under division, Robert Whiteman took the 18 and over division, but the 12 to 17 division was won by a teenager named Thor Åkerlund. Thor Åkerlund is largely remembered as the true, undisputed champion of the 1990 event. After the official tournament concluded, an informal exhibition match was held between the 3 age bracket winners. Thor destroyed the competition, taking first place overall. He achieved this by utilizing a completely revolutionary Tetris strategy. He pioneered a technique called hyper-tapping. Instead of holding down the directional pad to slide the puzzle pieces, Thor vibrated his fingers to rapidly tap the controller faster than the game's inbuilt auto-shift speed, allowing him to place blocks at a pace that was previously thought to be impossible. But Nintendo wasn't just organizing tournaments in 1990, they were heavily policing their hardware. At the time, Nintendo maintained an iron grip on what could be published on the NES, using a proprietary lockout chip called the 10NES. Third-party developers had to pay hefty licensing fees and agree to strict publishing limits. A company called Color Dreams decided to bypass this altogether, reverse engineering the lockout chip to release their games unlicensed. Nintendo, fiercely protective of their monopoly, launched a massive corporate crackdown. The Nintendo versus Color Dreams lawsuit became a defining battle over unlicensed software. To understand how they came up with the idea, you have to look at the absolute corner Color Dreams was backed into by 1990. Their founder, a brilliant self-taught engineer named Dan Lawton, had successfully reverse-engineered Nintendo's 10NES lockout chip. Because of this, they were legally manufacturing their own unlicensed cartridges. The problem wasn't the hardware, it was the retail space. Nintendo essentially ran a cartel. If a toy store or electronics retailer was caught selling unlicensed Color Dreams titles, Nintendo threatened to halt their shipments of official games. For a retailer in 1990, losing the supply of legitimate Nintendo products was a death sentence, so no one would touch Color Dreams games. Facing financial ruin and blacklisted by traditional game stores, Color Dreams executed one of the most brilliant pivots in gaming history. The company was bleeding money, sitting on a pile of notoriously low-quality games, and desperate for a lifeline. This is where the origin story of Wisdom Tree splits into two competing legends. According to one version of the story, Dan Lawton, who was not a religious man, pitched the idea of making Christian video games as an absolute joke. According to the second version, the idea was pitched in total earnest by an employee named Mike Wilson, who actually moonlighted as a Sunday school teacher and thought video games could be a non-violent way to reach kids. Regardless of who said it first, the punchline quickly became a revelation. The executives at Color Dreams realized something incredible. There were around 9,000 Christian bookstores in the United States. That was significantly more retail locations than Toys R Us had. Even better, Christian bookstores didn't sell video games, which meant Nintendo had absolutely zero leverage over them. In fact, if Color Dreams told Christian retailers that a massive secular Japanese corporation was trying to censor their games, the bookstores actively wanted to stock them even more. They had found a massive, completely untapped market that was effectively Nintendo-proof. In 1991, they officially spun off a new label named Wisdom Tree. But they didn't have the time or money to build brand new games from scratch, so they engaged in one of the most blatant asset-flipping campaigns ever seen. They took the code from their failed secular Color Dreams games, gave them a quick coat of biblical paint, and shipped them out. They took an unreleased Color Dreams game and rebuilt it into their flagship title, Bible Adventures. It shamelessly copied the gameplay style of Super Mario Bros. 2, but instead of plucking vegetables, you played as Noah, picking up cows and pigs and stacking them on your head, or as David fighting Goliath. The irony of the Wisdom Tree arc is that the development studio was largely made up of atheists, or developers who were actively deconverting from their faith, completely uninterested in the religious messages of the games they were making. They were just trying to keep the lights on. But the strategy worked flawlessly. Christian parents, desperate for family-friendly media that didn't involve shooting aliens or saving princesses, bought the games in droves. Bible Adventures alone sold over 350,000 copies. Wisdom Tree became incredibly profitable, completely outliving its parent company, while Color Dreams quietly exited the video game industry to focus on manufacturing digital surveillance cameras. The Wisdom Tree name was forever cemented in gaming history as the one unlicensed publisher that successfully beat Nintendo at its own game. Let's switch now to the games of 1990.
Released for the Famicom in February 1990, Dragon Quest IV: Chapters of the Chosen revolutionized how narratives were constructed in role-playing games. Developed by Chunsoft and published by Enix, this ambitious title broke away from the standard genre convention of immediately dropping a predetermined party of heroes into a grand quest. Instead, creator Yuji Horii boldly structured the game into 5 distinct chapters. The first 4 chapters acted as extended prologues, putting players in control of completely different protagonists. This included a dutiful knight, a tomboyish princess, 2 performing sisters, and a humble merchant named Torneco, whose primary goal was simply to run a successful weapon shop. This brilliant structure allowed players to build deep emotional connections with each companion before they finally united under the banner of the main hero in the sweeping 5th chapter. Mechanically, Dragon Quest IV also pushed boundaries by introducing an artificial intelligence tactics system in the final chapter. Players issued general behavioral guidelines to party members rather than controlling every move. Featuring Akira Toriyama's iconic character designs and a sweeping score by Koichi Sugiyama, it remains a phenomenal narrative milestone in the rich history of 8-bit role-playing video game adventures worldwide. While initially debuting on Japanese home computers in late 1989, Wise 3: Wanderers from Wise truly expanded its overall reach in 1990 with an impressive sharp X68000 port and subsequent console developments. Created by Nihon Falcom, this third entry in the legendary action role-playing series represented a massive, polarizing departure from its predecessors. Abandoning the classic top-down perspective and the signature bump combat system, Wise 3 completely transformed into a side-scrolling action platformer, drawing heavy gameplay comparisons to Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Following the red-haired swordsman Adol Christen and his companion Dogi as they traveled to the troubled town of Redmont, players now had to manually swing their swords, jump over hazards, and navigate multi-tiered environments. The game was considered a technical marvel at the time, utilizing impressive multi-plane parallax scrolling to give deep, layered backgrounds to its dungeons and mountains. While the radical shift in perspective alienated some hardcore fans, the game retained the staple character progression, equipment upgrades, and unique ring systems. Most importantly, it featured a blisteringly fast, phenomenal rock-inspired soundtrack by Mieko Ishikawa, keeping the epic acoustic energy of the franchise alive during that experimental gaming year perfectly.
Released on November 21, 1990 alongside the Super Famicom in Japan, Super Mario World was tasked with the monumental challenge of selling Nintendo's new 16-bit console. Directed by Takashi Tezuka and produced by Shigeru Miyamoto, the core development team of just 16 people had to prove that the graphical and processing leap from the NES was worth the investment. The result was not just a successful launch title, but a masterpiece that fundamentally redefined the platforming genre. The most significant evolution from Super Mario Bros. 3 was the introduction of Dinosaur Land. Instead of utilizing isolated, disconnected maps, Super Mario World presented a massive, fully interconnected overworld. This design choice gave players a profound sense of geographical continuity and adventure. Furthermore, the game revolutionized level progression by heavily integrating alternate exits. Finding secret keyholes scattered throughout the stages unlocked branching paths, hidden levels, and entirely new areas like the legendary Star Road and the brutally difficult Special Zone. This layered design encouraged deep exploration, turning the experience into a game of discovery rather than just a linear sprint to the right side of the screen. Mechanically, the game introduced elements that became permanent staples of the franchise. The most famous of these is Yoshi. Miyamoto had wanted Mario to ride a dinosaur since the original NES game, but the older 8-bit hardware simply couldn't handle the complex sprite overlap and animation. The 16-bit processor finally made Yoshi a reality, adding a brilliant layer of gameplay where the dinosaur could swallow enemies, stomp on hazards, and grant special abilities depending on the color of the Koopa shell in his mouth. Mario's own moveset was also expanded with the spin jump, allowing him to break blocks beneath his feet and bounce safely off spiked enemies. This was paired with the Cape Feather, a highly technical power-up that allowed skilled players to catch the wind and fly continuously over entire stages. Aesthetically, the game was a technological showcase. The Super Famicom's expanded color palette provided vibrant, detailed environments, while the new Sony-designed sound chip allowed legendary composer Koji Kondo to create a remarkably cohesive soundtrack. Amazingly, almost every level theme in the game is a clever variation of the exact same core melody, rearranged into different tempos and instruments. With over 20 million copies sold worldwide, Super Mario World stands as one of the most perfectly paced, endlessly replayable, and culturally significant video games ever created.
Released in 1990, Ultima 6: The False Prophet represented a massive foundational leap forward for computer role-playing games. Developed by Origin Systems and designed by Richard Garriott, this sixth installment completely dismantled the structural boundaries that had defined the genre for a decade. Previous Ultima titles utilized a fragmented perspective, shifting from a top-down view for world maps to separate zoomed-in screens for towns and first-person views for dungeons. Ultima 6 revolutionized this by introducing a single, unified isometric perspective. Every town, dungeon, and vast stretch of wilderness in the world of Britannia was seamlessly integrated onto one continuous map, rendered in glorious 256-color VGA graphics on high-end PCs. This created a level of immersion that was entirely unprecedented. Every object in the game world was interactive. Players could bake bread, play musical instruments, and move virtually any item they saw. Beyond its immense technical achievements, Ultima 6 delivered a deeply mature, philosophical narrative. Rather than fighting a traditional, inherently evil villain, the Avatar is forced into a brutal war against the Gargoyles, a demonic-looking race invading Britannia. However, as the story unfolds, players discover that the Gargoyles are not mindless monsters, but a deeply spiritual society reacting to the Avatar's own past actions, which inadvertently destroyed their homeland. By tackling complex themes of prejudice, cultural misunderstanding, and the destructive nature of blind zealotry, Ultima 6 proved that video games could deliver profound, thought-provoking stories while simultaneously pushing the absolute boundaries of computer hardware. Launching in 1990, The Secret of Monkey Island completely revolutionized the graphic adventure genre, forever changing how narrative games were designed. Created by Ron Gilbert, Tim Schafer, and Dave Grossman at Lucasfilm Games, this swashbuckling pirate comedy was a direct rebellion against the punishing design philosophies of the era. At the time, adventure games were notorious for cruel, unexpected player deaths and frustrating dead ends where a missed item could render the entire game unwinnable hours later. Ron Gilbert actively despised these mechanics. His development philosophy for Monkey Island was built entirely around the idea that the player should be allowed to explore, experiment, and make mistakes without being violently punished. If you did something foolish, the game rewarded you with a hilarious joke instead of a game over screen. Players took on the role of Guybrush Threepwood, a hopelessly naive but incredibly endearing young man desperate to become a fearsome pirate in the Caribbean. Utilizing the acclaimed Scum engine, players navigated the vibrant, beautifully pixelated world of Melee Island, solving absurd, logic-bending puzzles and engaging in the game's most iconic mechanic, insult sword fighting. Instead of relying on fast reflexes, combat was won by learning, memorizing, and deploying witty verbal comebacks. Backed by Michael Land's unforgettable, infectious reggae-infused soundtrack, the brilliant, razor-sharp writing of The Secret of Monkey Island elevated video game comedy to an absolute art form, establishing a legendary franchise and cementing Lucasfilm Games as the undisputed masters of the adventure genre. Before they created Doom or Quake, the founding members of id Software changed the PC gaming landscape forever with the 1990 release of Commander Keen: Invasion of the Vorticons.
At the time, the personal computer was widely considered a platform for slow-paced strategy titles, text adventures, and flight simulators. Fast, smooth, side-scrolling action like Super Mario Bros. Was believed to be mathematically impossible on PC hardware due to how computer monitors refreshed their graphical memory. A brilliant young programmer named John Carmack shattered this limitation. He developed a revolutionary technique called adaptive tile refresh, which finally allowed IBM-compatible computers to replicate the buttery smooth scrolling of a Nintendo Entertainment System. After Nintendo famously rejected their PC port of Super Mario Bros. 3, Carmack, John Romero, and Tom Hall decided to make their own original game. They created Billy Blaze, an 8-year-old boy genius who builds a spaceship out of household items, dons his brother's football helmet, and flies to Mars to stop an alien invasion. Commander Keen was a massive revelation. It brought console-quality platforming to the PC, complete with hidden secrets, a pogo stick mechanic, and charming, colorful graphics. Furthermore, it was distributed using the shareware model through Apogee software. The first episode was given away completely for free on bulletin board systems, hooking players instantly and encouraging them to mail in a check to purchase the remaining episodes. Commander Keen birthed a legendary development studio and single-handedly proved that the PC could be a premier platform for action games.
Released late in 1990, King's Quest V, Absence Makes the Heart Go Yonder, was a colossal technological leap that ushered in a brand new, visually stunning era for computer adventure games. Developed by Sierra Online and designed by industry pioneer Roberta Williams, this fifth installment of the beloved franchise completely discarded the text parser interface that had defined the series for years. Players no longer had to manually type out commands like opening doors or talking to characters on their keyboards. Instead, King's Quest V introduced a streamlined, icon-based, point-and-click interface. You simply selected an icon representing an action, like walking, looking, or using an item, and clicked directly on the screen. While this made the game incredibly accessible to a wider audience, its true selling point was its breathtaking presentation. King's Quest V was the first Sierra title to utilize gorgeous, hand-painted 256-color VGA graphics. The lush forests, scorching deserts, and dark castles of Serenia were meticulously painted on canvas, scanned into computers, and translated into digital art, creating a visual fidelity that left players absolutely speechless. Following King Graham on a desperate quest to save his family from an evil wizard, the game was notoriously unforgiving, featuring incredibly obtuse puzzles and numerous ways to accidentally die or render the game unwinnable. Despite its punishing difficulty, King's Quest V was an astronomical commercial success, becoming the best-selling computer game in history at the time and setting an entirely new visual and mechanical standard for the industry. The year 1990 was a monumental turning point, setting the stage for a decade of fierce rivalries and incredible technological leaps. But as the curtain fell on the Nintendo World Championships and the 16-bit era began to truly find its footing, an even bigger storm was brewing on the horizon. Next time, we will dive into a year defined by a fast blue hedgehog, the arrival of the Super Nintendo in North America, and a fighting game that changed arcades forever. If you enjoyed this journey back in time, please make sure to subscribe so you do not miss our next episode, 1991. The Console War Ignites.